Thank you. Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? Some of you may have seen this or parts of this before, and but I will go through it, and then when I'm done at the end, we will have some questions. So here we go. Once upon a time, people got together, and they got together in large groups. But now we just stay at home. Yeah, so here's a shot of the first show that Stephen Colbert did after the lockdown began on March 12th, and he did his first show from his bathtub using his iPhone. And there he is in his study. And there's James Corden in his garage. Now, this has been the way that you've seen the Late Show and the Late Show for the last 4 months. Both of these shows, as of this week and next week, are going back into their, I don't want to say their studios, but they're going back into their original buildings in a heavily modified form, socially distant form. But this is the way that they did their shows when they had to actually do them from their homes. And for what it's worth, we are prepared to move them back into their homes again in a moment's notice if we need to. So first, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, or as he calls it, A Late Show with Stephen Colbert, because it's not the full-fledged show. The show is done with primarily 2 cameras. We have a wide camera that just shoots him in his study, and then a tight shot that's used for alternate angles and close-ups. Here's a shot of the main camera, and then here's a shot of the tight camera. That's usually used for his quarantine while, or which is the home version of his meanwhile segment. Now here's the actual flow of how it actually works. And pardon me while I try to move my, I don't want my camera. I want to move the GoToMeeting stuff off from over on top of it so I can see it. There we go. Okay. So if you see my little mouse arrow moving around, this is the flow. We have the flow that comes from his home. The primary methodology that the show is produced on is using live view via his internet connection. The 2 cameras come back via live view and go into this switcher, which is a small switcher, the main switcher, within Studio 50, which is the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York. The backup path is via satellite. He literally has a KU truck sitting in his backyard, just in case they have to, in case the live view or his internet goes down. So 2 feeds come back. 1 or 2 feeds can go back to him at his house through the switcher. Everything goes in and is done on a Ross graphite. That's not the main switcher that was normally used for the show, but it's something that was purchased just to do the at-home show version. Everybody, that's both talent and remote talent and any other show production, is all connected via live view. There are approximately 14 or 15 unique live view feeds that go out so that everybody can do it at home. There are only 2 people actually at Studio 50. There's an engineer on the 7th floor dealing with maintaining the post-production gear, and there's an engineer down in the basement maintaining the transmissions gear. So they've got 7 floors of social distancing between them. And those are the only 2 people actually at Studio 50, the Ed Sullivan. Everybody else is working from home. So even the guests are all brought in via Zoom. The Zoom is running 1080 p30 using Zoom Pro. Because of latency on the live view, and even more if they're on the satellite, all the Zoom guests have to be delayed so that the Zoom guest, when switched through the switcher, is exactly in time with the conversation and whatever Stephen Colbert is having with them. He deals with them talking directly via live view. So his link to them does not go back through the studio. It's just strictly live view. And in the studio, they're monitoring that live view channel. Comes in, it's delayed. All the remote control of the Ross is also done remotely using RDS or RDG desktop remote. So using remote desktop, they're able to control all the video functionality on the ROS. They're able to control all the audio functionality on the ROS. The post-production, both the AVIDs and the EVSs are all done with remote desktop, with people either looking at the remote desktop or looking at the Zoom feed. So they're watching via Zoom, which is very, very extremely low latency. So they can actually do production with Zoom. Obviously, the quality of what they're seeing is somewhat limited. So they're having to rely on scopes and that type of information that can also be called up remotely, either via the Avid or via the ROS or other devices. But they do have to live primarily with Zoom quality audio and video. But that's, they've learned to adapt and learned to deal with it. Same thing with the teleprompter. Teleprompter person is remotely operating via RDA remote desktop. The teleprompter, the actual original script, is running back at Studio 50. But except for the prompter operator who's on via remote desktop, everybody else is watching a Zoom feed of the prompter, or a Zoom or a copy of the prompter can be sent back via live view or via satellite. Most of the time they look at it via Zoom, but it is also available that way. Same thing for if guests are doing skits remotely, they can also watch the prompter remotely via Zoom. So the key to all this going on is Zoom. Here's a shot of the band director remotely from his club, and here relative examples of what's going out via the remote viewers of the multi-viewer of the various multi-viewers, so that everybody can see what is going on via Zoom. Here's a shot of the control panel for the ROS, both for the video and the audio, as well as the Avid via remote desktop. As you can see, everything has been meticulously and carefully and neatly installed. All right, it was thrown on a table in a closet, but hey, it works. They didn't have a whole lot of time to do this, so they put the stuff in where they could, but they managed to get back up on the air after only with a enhanced production. Enhancements went along the way, but they were able to get back on the air in a little under 2 weeks and get back up. And that was actually quite an accomplishment in a short period of time. They had a little bit of advanced warning that this was coming. Stephen Colbert's father used to be a high-ranking person at the CDC, and for the folks who worked on the show, said that before anybody else realized how bad this was going to be, Mr. Colbert was quite concerned and said we need to be prepared to work remotely. So that's one of the reasons the show was able to get back up so quick. There's the graphite just stuck in a rack in a storage area there. But that's when you watch the Late Show, that's the graphite you see. Production output of the switcher. Typical interview with a guest, once again, all done remotely. And then once again, back to the slide showing how the flow is done. Now, this is how they did the Late Show. What's interesting is the Late Show with James Gordon takes a totally different approach to post-production. This show came on the air, back on the air about 4 weeks after the Late Show. That gave them some more time, but they took a different methodology to doing the show. He is also doing his show from home, in this case from his garage, or as he pronounces it, his garage. And there he is, sitting there. He actually, James Corden has 4 cameras that he uses. He has a straight-on shot, he has an over-the-shoulder shot, a wide shot, and then a tight shot of him when he's actually on his computer zooming with guests. The workflow in his home consists of 2 Blackmagic and 2 Sony cameras. So these are not professional studio cameras, but they actually are producing a 1080p or 1080i signal. Actually, all these cameras are actually capable of 4K, but they're not operating in that mode. So they use all these 4 cameras. They're fixed. There's no PTZs. They're all fixed cameras. They go in through DAs. There is a Blackmagic switcher At one point, it was thought that they would be using this to actually switch the show, but actually they decided that the best way to do the show is to put it together in post. So there is a rough cut that is switched and fed back and recorded. But what you're actually seeing is conform video later. We then have a decimator that there's actually multiple decimators that create multiple multi-view images, which all go to Zoom. So the folks back in the who are remotely watching it and who will be remotely producing the show later can watch all the images from their home. Once again, all the operational people are at home. Same thing, teleprompter via Zoom that can be viewed both by Mr. Gordon and by everybody remotely. And once again, Zoom guests that come in. In this particular case, the Zoom actually comes into his house and then is recorded locally. They did set up both his internet via cable modem, and they actually put in a microwave to back it up. The original concept was that they were going to be, switching and producing the show similar to the way Colbert is done, but that ended up not being how they actually produced this show. This show is done almost exclusively by taking the video and conforming it back at TV City. So everything is recorded on multiple Aja Key Pros, the Ultra Pluses, and stored on flash memory. But as I said, the show is actually post-produced at Television City, or at least the gear that post-produces at Television City. The people are not; they're producing it remotely. But that means that all that information, all that data has to get back. So what happens? Well, the flash drives are pulled out, and using a contactless system of putting it in a case and having a courier run back and forth periodically through the day, they pull out the flash drives, and a courier picks them up outside his garage, runs them back to TV City where the case is put down, and another person picks it up and goes inside and installs it in the editors back at TV City, where the show is then post-produced remotely. Once again, no people there, and they produce the final output of the show in that manner. So there's a shot of him. Now, one difference between the shows is, while is a lot more use of Zoom on the Late Show with James Gordon. Here he is talking to a guest via Zoom. Okay, that's similar between the two shows. But he also has his band via Zoom. So there's Reggie and the rest of the band. They are also zoomed in, so they can interact in real time with him and do banter, because this show has a lot more conversation, and so there's a lot more Zoom guests and Zoom remotes that goes on. Another factor is the Late Show is much more of a fun, comical, forget your cares type show, or at least that's the concept of it, as opposed to Stephen Colbert, who's obviously more topical and more news related. So he has a lot of games. So the question is, if you can't have people in the studio to do games, how do you do games? Well, here you see him doing a game with 16 different people who've been selected remotely. Now, what's different is that it has to be post-produced. So here you have a lot of post-production, which actually goes on with the show, where they are able to take it and using Wirecast and vMix, they're able to take the various elements and both in real time and in post produce them. And in fact, here is the Emmy Award winning director of The Late Show and technical director and the person responsible for Carpool Karaoke, Oleg Sokolovsky. And here he is having to double as an engineer and fix all his own gear because he's trapped at home, having to work on the production gear in his house. So here's an example of one of the games. The game comes in via Zoom, and they actually line the tiles up similar to what you see here, but using vMix, they actually isolate each one of the Zoom feeds by literally doing effectively a DVE move and carving it out into a unique stream that can be manipulated and flipped. They also can bring in, using a separate Zoom channel and a virtual machine, additional the same guests again, but bring them in as a higher resolution, and using vMix and Wirecast, mix them back in. So here you can see an example of the actual Zoom multi-screen image that was brought in for a game. Using vMix, they isolate each one of these squares, break it out into a unique element stream, and record it and manipulate it in vMix. And they can also take an individual guest, bring her in on a virtual machine for a higher resolution, and mix that in depending on what the requirements of the game or the interview are. All this can then be converted back to Zoom and streamed back out on a Zoom channel live in real time with minimal latency. So that in many cases, the guests can be sitting at home watching their feed and actually watching the vMix output of them live. And often for games, this is necessary if people are, have things put up over them or red X's or their screen is blacked out, depending on what the game is. So they can do a version of what they've been doing in the studio via multiple Zoom channels and Wirecast and vMix. So I said that they had 4 cameras in the studio. Well, in the case of this show, effectively he has one more. And that's because they will actually use James Gordon's Zoom camera as a 5th camera in the studio. So here you can see an example of him here on the left actually talking and interacting via his Zoom camera. And then there is the high quality production camera looking at him talking into his Zoom camera. And that is done to give a more, Zoom type feel to it in some cases. And that is actually switched live to disc, but then they post produce mix in the higher quality studio cameras. And there you can see a shot there of him talking to his guests on Zoom. Okay, I did it a bit faster this time, so I guess that leaves me time for questions. However, I do need to give credits here. I need to thank James Valvo, Director of Operations Engineering and for Studio Production at CBS, who helped me with this, along with David Hallmark, Studio Manager for Television City, and of course, Oleg Sokolovsky, who was pictured earlier, who is the Technical Director of The Late Show with James Gordon, and engineer and floor polisher and everything else for his home studio, where most of the Zoom stuff you see comes out of in real time. So if anybody has any questions, I will turn my camera back on. Or I will try to turn my camera back on. There we go.
Thanks, Rick.
There I am.
Yay. And I didn't mention at the beginning, but Rick is now an employee of CBS. He'll be moving to New York sometime. And so he is the Director of Transmission of Engineering for CBS. So are you excited about that, Rick?
Yeah, I've been with them for 10 weeks now, and even though I'm still in Atlanta, it's been a whole lot of work remotely, trying to keep all this stuff going. And but yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back into the full-time grind.
Cool. We have a question here from, looks like Jack Linder. How do they like Zoom Pro? They have the band working by Zoom. How does latency work, assuming you have multiple band members in different places?
The latency works pretty good. They do some stuff for when the band actually plays, as opposed to doing just some shtick, so to speak, with James Gordon. There are some other things that I'm not going to get into that are done when the band actually plays. But the main reason for having the band is that they're an interactive part of his show. The live band is less for the music than it is the interaction.
Okay. If you have any questions, just go to the questions tab on GoToWebinar and type your question in. Rick, I'm going to ask you a question while we're waiting. Oh, see, Jack came back. Zoom Pro. Yeah, he said. Oh, he's just saying again. Did you mention about how do they like Zoom Pro? Is it working good?
Oh, yes, they're very happy with it.
Okay,
The folks at Zoom have been very responsive when they've had questions and some technical changes they needed made. Um,
good.
Whenever possible, the Zoom folks have been very, very supportive. There were a few things that they would have liked, but the Zoom folks explained technically why that would have been a huge undertaking for them. Certain
Okay,
things that occasionally appear to be simple mods, just due to the way the system works, actually are really massive undertakings to change.
okay. Um, I have a quick question for you. So you can ship gear into somebody, and I've heard where like the son of somebody's son was help hooking it
Yeah.
up, things like that. You can send a line drawing. You can say connect the BNCs, whatever. But what about lighting? Like, has that been a challenge at all? And how'd they make
Yeah.
that work?
In both shows, lighting people were sent in. Literally, they were the only ones in there. The talent had to leave the area. The lighting folks came in, did their job, wiped everything down when they left, and said, "I'm walking out the door. You can come back in." So both of those shows had professional lighting people there. You can see that more with James Corden because he has lots of colorful
Yeah,
lighting.
yeah,
It looks
yeah.
like a studio.
Yep.
But even the room type of lighting done on the Late Show was done when a professional lighting person was sent in.
Okay. Another question came in from Michael Greenwood. Has the backup satellite path had to be used yet?
In the early days, they used it quite a bit, but the internet has been very, very reliable. There's only 2 channels of it, and I'm not aware of any outages. I will say there is um, was a flip side that was done in that at James Corden's house, they had the microwave, which they put in as a backup and never used. And so then, just before he stopped doing his show, because the show normally goes on a summer hiatus, which was delayed, but he got a bit of one.
Hmm.
They removed the microwave, and Murphy's Law being what it is, the week after for the last week of the show, they didn't have the microwave, and his internet went down.
Oh. Hmm.
Um, so
So a follow-up question to that was, and I think I know the answer to this. He's saying the satellite link is not up, right? It's only up. It only goes up if it has to, right?
well, early on they brought it up all the time because
Okay.
they didn't know what to expect. And so it's a mixture. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's not. I believe most of the time they have brought it up. I'm not certain how much they've used it, but that they have brought it up for uh, the Late Show.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Um, is there any more questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to Brian. And people can still ask questions. So, um, oh, here's one. Were audio engineers dispatched at the home also?
At James's home, I believe they were because crew went in and set up.
Okay.
Uh, at Steven's home, no.
Mm-hmm.
The people there, because remember this thing came up much quicker,
Mm-hmm.
and there was obviously a great deal of concern, and PPE was not readily available for the first few weeks.
Yeah.
Um, so almost everything that was done in for the Late Show was done primarily by Stephen Colbert's son.
Okay.
The main exception to that being when they had to send the lighting person in. Um,
Okay.
and then for James Corden, it was a professional setup, but it's really easy to leave your garage and not
Right.
go in your
Right.
garage while other people are in there.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Rick, very much. That was awesome. But you're going to stay to the end, right? Because we might
Yes.
have more questions. Okay, cool. So, let's see. Okay, so Brian Nelson is with Alpha Video, and he's going to do a presentation here. Brian is the broadcast accounts manager, right, Brian? And
Correct. Yep.
so anyway, so let me turn the screen over to you. Stand by. Okay, you should be able to do it now. Great, we see
All
you.
right. Should be seeing my
Okay.
screen now.
Yep, it's all yours. Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Bob. And thank you for the Atlanta chapter for hosting today. So I'm Brian Nelson with Alpha Video, as Bob mentioned. A little bit of background on who Alpha Video is. So we're a full service systems integrator. We sell Viz, Grass Valley, Ross, NewTek, a lot of the products that you guys are probably familiar with. So we're located up in Minneapolis. We got about 100+ staff. We started in 1970. So today we're celebrating our 50th anniversary, and I personally have been with Alpha for 28 years. I started in August of 1992, so I'm celebrating my 28th year this month. So today's agenda, we're going to cover a little bit about the remote contribution project we did for the 2020 NFL Draft. Next, we're going to cover some at-home editing workflows using NDI. Then we're going to cover some at-home production monitoring using NDI. And last but not least, we're going to talk about virtualized NDI production in the cloud. So one thing we're going to talk about today is NDI. Some of you might be using it. Some of you might have heard of it. Some of you maybe have not heard of it. So NDI is Network Device Interface, and it's a compressed video protocol over gigabit Ethernet networks. Features auto discovery, which means cameras can see receiving devices and they can communicate across the LAN. Handles PTZ camera control, tally, and under monitor displays. And it was developed by our friends over at NewTek, which is now owned by Viz, as most of you know. And there's an open SDK out there, so you guys see products from Sony, Panasonic, JVC, and many others that support the NDI protocol. The second thing we're going to cover is a little bit about SRT, and I'm sure you guys have probably heard about this one. It's the Secure Reliable Transport. This one is designed specifically for video over the public internet. As I mentioned with NDI, it's kind of designed more for the local subnet. SRT was designed from the beginning as getting video across the public internet. It includes forward error correction at AES 128 for encryption and security. It was developed by Haivision, and there's also an open SDK. So you see a lot of products from different manufacturers now supporting SRT. So let's talk about the NFL draft for a minute. So the NFL sent out hundreds of iPhone 11s to, we call them participants, but this was players, coaches, general managers, owners' homes. All those streams had to be aggregated into AWS EC2 instances. We need to create a bunch of multi-viewers for at-home producers and staff and talent. And then at the end of the day, we need to deliver on-prem SDI outputs for the live broadcast. There was a traditional broadcast switcher at ESPN in Bristol that did the end transmission. An extremely short time frame. You guys may remember COVID lockdown happened, mid-March, and the NFL draft was in April. So this whole thing had to be developed and deployed and tested and rehearsed in a very short amount of time. So for those of you who haven't seen the draft, this is just kind of a screenshot of the end result. On the left-hand side, we see a head coach and executive GM. So that's the iPhone 11s that I mentioned.
Hey, Brian, I don't see your screen. Wonder what
happened. You don't see my screen?
I saw the first pictures. Okay, there we go.
You see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I moved it over to my second display and it probably went away.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks for letting me know. Here's kind of another example of what the ultimate on-air production looked like. These were referred to as the always-on cameras. And in my opinion, these iPhone 11s look better on the air than Commissioner Goodell's feed that had a dual redundant path satellite feed to his house. So here's just kind of a bubble chart of the cameras. You can see them up here across the top, club, GMs, head coaches. These were the always-on cameras coming into AWS. We were partnered with a company called Van Wagner, which is over here on the left. They were aggregating all these feeds, creating multi-viewers and picking which feeds come out SDI through DTAGs and then to ESPN to the Bristol control room. So there's another simple drawing of what this looks like with the iPhone 11s on the left. We use the Larix Broadcaster app, which is free in the iOS and Android store. You can download it, and it makes your smartphone a SRT transmitting device. So we took that SRT feed from the camera, and actually there was a Haivision gateway in the middle, but it had SRT in and SRT out. We took this into Amazon. We had two 96-core instances running here with a product called NDI Processing Engine. We converted all that NDI we converted the SRT into NDI. We created a bunch of multi-viewers that then got sent out to at-home and production staff. We also combined it with NDI Router, which is a virtualizable NDI routing system. And we gave the users at home a browser-based router soft control panel that they could switch what sources or what multi-viewers they were seeing at home. And then up here at the top, we used an NDI cloud node. And what that does is it encapsulates all the NDI video signals that are up here in Amazon and sends them across the public internet to another cloud node. And this was at Van Wagner in North Carolina. And they took the NDI feeds coming in, we broke those out with 2 HP servers using 8-channel Blackmagic cards to give us 16 HDS DI basebands that fed the Bristol control room. So NDI processing engine, I know I kind of mentioned, is basically like, it's a product that is the same as like an open gear frame, but it's virtualizable. So it has your up, down, cross converters, embedders, de-embedders, branding, logo insertion, multi-viewers as mentioned. This is just kind of a set of the modules that are available in processing engine. This gray box here that you're seeing is these noodles in between connect the modules. So we have an NDI source coming in, and the drafts case was an SRT source coming in. Picture in pictures, bug inserters, and sending it back out, multi-viewers. You can see up here, distribution amps, the failover switch we used for the draft. So if they lost an iPhone 11 incoming feed, it would go over to an NFL draft logo picture. And you can see there's regular embedding, audio embedding, SRT and output, mumble intercom server if you need to integrate comms with this, and a few other features. For the draft, we used the plus option, which gave us some more sophisticated multi-viewers with level meters and under monitor displays. The plus option has a little 6-input NDI production switcher and some scopes. This is kind of a layout for the draft. This was running in North Carolina. I know it's probably an eye chart for most of you, but you'll see that the SRT feeds coming in, going through failover switches, graphics coming in if it's failed over. Funny story that when everybody fired up their iPhone 11s at home, even though they were all supposed to be imaged the same, we found that some of them were doing 60p and some of them were doing 30p. So we either had to call hundreds of people and tell them to adjust the settings on their phones, or what we did is we put in a frame sync and an up-down cross converter in the signal chain to make sure we were prepared for anything that was coming into the system. So this is just kind of a picture of what Van Wagner had running in North Carolina. You can see that canvas that I just showed you running on his beautiful 49-inch super ultra wide display. You can see his multi-viewer monitors right above that. You can see where this is during rehearsals, and the iPhone 11s were starting to pop up, and you can see the failover switches working for the rest of them that are showing the NFL Draft logo. We also used, as I mentioned, the NDI router product, which is a virtualizable unlimited I/O. You see up here, there's a browser-based XY control panel. This middle one here was the browser panel that we used for the draft. In this case, we see 64 signals coming in from the NFC and the AFC from the camera feeds, and then we got the 16 SDI sources that were going to the control room with the green buttons on the right. So then we're going to switch gears for a second and talk about at-home editing. This is an application that NDI is being used for a lot lately with COVID. So at-home nonlinear editing, I mean, it seems as simple as you just send a laptop out to somebody and they can edit. The problem is that you guys have got shared storage and archive systems on-prem. You might have your editing systems controlled, with file delivery to production control rooms for news playout and master control. So editing at home with content at home doesn't work for a lot of people. And people started using remote desktop and some thin clients to log into the editor in the edit bay. But the problem is that you don't have good video preview return back to the person's home. So we have a couple of solutions we've deployed for that. As you can see, here's a simple scenario of here's our at-home editor on the right-hand side. He's using a remote desktop or any other tools that are available out there to log into his edit system on premise. And both Avid and Adobe have native NDI outputs of the timeline. So we take that native NDI playout from the editor, send it NDI across the public internet, and there's free players that Sienna allows. This is the product that we use for this, is the Sienna NDI remote monitor. They have free player apps that you can run on a Mac, on a Windows machine. There's iOS versions for like iPad. And there's also an Apple TV version, so you could actually use your 60-inch TV in your living room as your editing program display if you wanted to. And because this is UDP coming across the public internet, you can also send the feed to a remote client or a producer for an over-the-shoulder third monitor type application. and just give them the link and the application, and they can watch the same feed as the editor. And this happens in like 6 frames latency. We've seen 2 frames latency, we've seen 6 frames latency, but the worst you see is about 20 frames of latency to these remote viewers. The next slide shows this in a more enterprise environment. Let's say you have 5 or 10 editors, Avid or Adobe's, and they all have NDI. What we've done is taking the processing off of the editor, and we've taken NDI across the public internet into a processing engine, added forward error correction and transcoded it for delivery over the public internet. And then we have our at-home editors over here. And because of the multi-viewers I mentioned with processing engine earlier, is we can actually take all our timelines and make a multi-viewer and then send that out as a compressed NDI feed to a production manager. And we actually, Philadelphia Eagles uses this, and the production manager could sit at home on a 60-inch TV and see all his editors edit in real time on their timelines. And that's a function that he didn't even have when he was in the office. A couple other things I'll point out on this slide is for non-NDI capable nonlinear editors. There's some simple throwdown converters from NewTek, Magwell, KiloView that take SDI and HDMI and convert it to NDI. And then we send it down the same path. Down here on the right, I'll note that surprisingly enough, there's been people that take their 24-inch Sony and Ikegami professional production monitors at home and want to edit from those, edit using those. So because this is all NDI, the at-home editor can actually use another NDI converter to take NDI, go back out to SDI, and then they can use their favorite production preview monitor at home if they wanted to. So the next topic we're going to cover is at-home broadcast monitoring. And this would be a case for an at-home Ross overdrive operator, Sony ELC operator, Grass Valley Ignite, maybe a Crispin or a Grass Valley ITX master control operator. Still using remote desktop, you guys can get in and see those. You can see the systems and operate them. The one thing we're still missing again is real-time low latency preview at home. So in this scenario, we're taking 8 channels of SDI from their house, Evertz or Imagine Utah router. We're converting that into NDI, going in the processing engine, adding forward error correction and making a low latency feed that the people can watch at home, and then giving them a router control panel in a browser that they can select what sources. And this could be a multi-viewer coming from processing engine, but some people take their Kaleido or the output of their Carbonite or Acuity switcher multi-viewer, and they're just passing the multi-viewer that's going to their monitor wall to their house. But either way, you can use the control panel to select whatever sources the operator want to see at home. And I have over here on the right an example of what this looks like, just an 8-channel Blackmagic IO card and a 1RU Dell computer converts SDI to NDI, another 1RU Dell computer running the processing engine, and it sends the feeds out to the remote operators. Just kind of an example, we see somebody's laptop at home with the router control panel in the background, and then seeing a quad view running on their iPad. So this is the same scenario at scale. We have customers running 40 SDI feeds into processing engine that have 20 remote operators. So this system can scale quite large. And people ask, well, geez, we have editing workflows and we also have live production workflows. Can we merge those two things together? So we have this deployed at a customer where we're taking Adobe Premiere, Viz Engine NDI feeds, Media Composer NDI feeds into a cloud node. We're also taking NDI feeds from their LiveView receivers. So your 4-channel LU2000 has 4 channels of SDI, but as well it has 4 channels of NDI output. So we're taking that into a cloud node. The customer had some baseband SDI IO that they had to do. So we took that all through an NDI cloud node, brought it up to Amazon. And then editors at home, production staff, engineering, and everybody else could monitor all those feeds at home. For this particular customer, because the processing engine I mentioned earlier takes NDI, SRT, HLS, RTMP, RTSP, and MPEG transport stream in and out, we're actually taking things from their high vision gateways and encoders coming into processing engine. We can view all those as well. And we can actually take any of these feeds and send it out to high vision decoders as well. And what's not pictured on here is we're actually feeding their internal in-house IPTV system as well. So anybody on the in-house IPTV system can watch any of these feeds. So now we're going to switch over to our last topic for the day is cloud and virtualized live production. Of course, another hot topic during COVID. So this slide goes over a hybrid cloud-based and on-prem control room scenario where we've taken all the feeds in a on-prem control room, converted them all to NDI. We delivered them up into Amazon, but in this case, we can use either vMix, or this is the Sienna's Vision Mixer to actually switch the show, or you can actually bring all those feeds down and switch them in a control room. This control room here on the right could actually live, and we have customers that are doing this, all their camera feeds from the control room go up to Amazon, the show gets switched, but the output of Amazon goes back on-prem and goes out to distribution. So yeah, you could be in a failover state, whereas if everything is working and everybody can be in the control room, we're doing it this way. If we have to social distance and send some people out of it, maybe we transition into part of this lower part, the TD being at home, remote graphic operator being at home, and the remote producer being at home. And as you guys probably saw, Ross Expression, Viz, of course, because they own NewTek, Chiron, and everybody else out there has native NDI outputs of graphic systems. So though you can do your graphics and everything else that way. I talked a little bit earlier about the 6-input basic NDI production switcher. As part of Processing Engine, there's an AI mixer out there that can actually switch a show based on audio cues. I wouldn't recommend this for the nightly news, but for some radio and some podcast applications where you need cameras, this can actually operate your show without a TD. So this last slide, and then I'll be done, is kind of the holy grail of virtualized production. Different than the slide I had before, which was using either vMix or Sienna's Vision Mixer. This one is actually virtualizing Viz graphics and virtualizing, I have on the slide, the NewTek VMC1 production switcher, but Viz now calls this the virtualizable vector. But this can be a full 44 input 8 ME switcher with 4 channels of Viz graphics that can be all operated out of an AWS instance. So we see down here, somebody's operating the TriCaster from home, remote Viz graphics operation from home, remote producer and multi-viewer and engineering from home. This part on the right doesn't have to exist. We have a lot of people using this scenario and strictly delivering, because Processing Engine here, as I mentioned, can go out HLS, RTMP, and a bunch of other codecs. We have people coming up, shooting everything, producing it in the cloud, and then just delivering OTT over the top. And we have some people taking MPEG transport stream and delivering it. So without further ado, I know I talk kind of fast, but I was trying to keep that within a half an hour. So I guess we'll put it back to Bob to see if there's any questions that have come up.
Wow, that was a lot.
Was that too fast? Too much to digest in 25 minutes?
So I'm going to start off with a question. Looking at NDI, there's several different versions of it. Started out as the higher quality 100 megabit bit rate, but now they're supporting H.264 and H.265. So when you were referencing NDI, how do we know at what point, to the cloud, or all these different drawings you showed, what point is the higher bit rate and what point is the MPEG-4?
Yeah, so when we go out to remote viewers, the magic with the wizard behind the curtain, like in this slide here, we take NDI full bandwidth, as you mentioned, it's like 100 megabit feed on a local area network. The Processing Engine retranscodes that into like a 6 megabit feed, could range anywhere from 2 megabit, 6 megabit, all the way up to 20 megabit, but it's H.264, similar to an SRT feed. And it's actually encapsulated in SRT. Sienna has a codec that's a little bit improved over SRT, because when it comes to like nonlinear editing, we have weird things and frame rates that happen on timelines and when you scrub. So it's like a modified SRT package that goes out to the remote viewers. So at that point, it's not technically NDI, but we can convert it back to NDI on the other end. But yeah, there's NDI. Earlier last year, we had NDI 8-bit. Then last fall, we migrated to NDI 16-bit with a roadmap to HDR support. Then they came out with HX, which is wrapping H.264 and NDI wrapper. Think about NDI as there's the intelligence in it, and then there's the video codec. Originally, it was a video codec with intelligence. And then NewTek decided, wow, if we could replace the video codec with something else inside, it would make it a lot more flexible. So now we can pass H.264 in there, H.265, or native NDI, and that's where the HX label comes from, or HX2, which is what supports H.265 now. So.
Right. Okay, great. There's a couple questions here. Let's see. If the edit staff can work effectively at home when the pandemic lifts, will networks and studios be tempted to shift away from the higher dollar on-site post-production real estate and stay with remote editing?
Well, what's really interesting is we're seeing a trend. I know this was talked about long before COVID, and a handful of people were doing it, but virtualizing all the edit bays. So there's one scenario where you edit from home, but there's the nice room with the big monitor and the big workstation and everything else. So we're just remote controlling that edit bay and previewing it. But we had a lot of people move 50 and 100 edit systems into Amazon. There's products out there like Bebop, or if you know, there's a lot of products that you can virtualize Avid and Adobe Premieres in the cloud, and they're still using NDI, and we can still put processing engine up there to get real-time video preview and feedback feeds when it's in Amazon. But yeah, I do see a time where everybody's going to be editing in the cloud, and the actual, and a couple customers are actually editing in edit bays while they're in the cloud on-prem. So they don't have the big Mac or HP $8,000 or $15,000 computer.
Right.
They're just a thin client and edit bay and editing.
Wow. I have a statement, not a question for you, from Robert Castro. It says, I love the video toaster poster over your shoulder.
Oh, thank you. From all of 1990. I've been around 28 years. That's my poster from 1990.
That's fine. Hey, Brian, do me a favor. Can you go back to the beginning of your presentation, because you showed a slide, then you started talking about technologies, and I just thought it was supposed to be white, and then we realized when you advanced, we didn't see it. So go to the very beginning, and then, yeah, and let's just step through that real quick and see what we missed.
Yeah, so I don't know where I dropped off.
Yep, yeah, right there. Yep, go ahead and show that. Okay.
Yeah, just what is NDI?
Yep.
And then what was SRT?
Yep.
Is that where we lost it, or maybe that's where we came back online?
Yeah, yep. And then there was about the iPhone 11s. Okay. What's the next slide? Yeah, okay. I remember we started seeing pictures then. Okay, cool. Okay. We're good then. All right. Anybody else have any other questions you want to post? I'm watching here. Let's see. Let's see if there's anything back to Rick. You want to come back to us? Let's see. Mentioned audio engineers. Oh, Jason asked the question, what kind of challenges has relying on Zoom presented? Is there anything about relying on Zoom that has been challenging?
Well, obviously it's a teleconferencing app. It's not a broadcast video app. So depending on the computer, depending on the phone they're using and the connection, the quality can be all over the place. Sometimes it looks really, really good, and sometimes it doesn't. Same thing can be said for the audio. Sometimes people are using their iPhone with it, 6 feet away from them. Other times they've got their Bluetooth earbud in. Other times they've actually got a decent Bluetooth microphone, and they sound terrific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we talked the other day, Rick, is, a lot of the shows, even like, as TMZ, doing the Zoom look type thing with all the people at home. My wife's biggest complaint is the audio. I mean, it's like, she can handle compressed video, but when you can't hear the person and it sounds like the mic's on the other side of the room, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I have a boom mic here. It's very frustrating. So I think that's it's been a big challenge, is trying to get people to use real microphones. And you can use, I have it's right here. I can't show it to you, but
I'm nonchalantly looking for my lav, which I'm not wearing because I'm wearing my headset, but I've got a lav that I use sometimes.
I have an iRig here that I got on B&H with an XLR input. It even does phantom power, and it was $50. So, you can, there's and you can plug in your iPhone, by the way. It has a lightning connector. So there's ways to fix this problem. It's just, it's frustrating sometimes people don't do it. Let's see if I have another question here.
I'll kind of chime in while you're waiting for a question to come in, is that Microsoft announced that Teams is going to get NDI capabilities mid this month.
Okay.
So for people using NDI and workflows, it'll be possible to get ISO feeds from all the cameras from a Teams session.
Okay.
Because Rick, as you've probably gone through this, to get all the pinned, scan converter versions of all the individual people so you can recompile it in the production workflow gets kind of challenging. To pull all those out with vMix and everything else, that if you could run Teams and have everybody in a Teams session and just get 12 isolated NDI feeds to your production switcher or vMix directly from Teams, that's going to be revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
So just something I'll point out.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
we all
I have,
love Zoom, but
I have to take advantage of the situation. My other cap is that I'm the chair of RIST for the Video Services Forum, and RIST is integrating with AWS as well as other AWS platforms. So there's options. We'll
oh, and
just
I
find.
love, yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, we've been
Um,
taking Rist into processing engine, so we have inputs and outputs for that now. So yeah, the more
cool.
codecs that are available offers us more flexibility to get things done. And a Rist does look a lot better than SRT, so I'm a fan.
Okay, last question. Somebody asked, Rick, I think it's more about you. Well, I guess both you guys. What about home internet speeds? Has this been a challenge? Because, some people are really
Yes.
slow and you can have 100 megabits easy, on Comcast, or you can get a gig with AT&T. So what
Right.
challenge is there?
I'll go first, and you can. We're looking at, because we're concerned with at CBS. We've got a bunch of shows, and obviously, if the COVID situation takes a turn for the worst in New York, we've got several shows that are going to have to decamp from the studio and go home, and we're looking at the options. And the options, if it's a home that has fiber availability, such as FiOS or AT&T, versus not, is very different. So we are looking at platforms that can either multi-encode or can default over, that if where we would put in multiple internet connections to a home, possibly a FiOS if we can get it, and then whatever else if we can't. And the codec might operate in a high data rate, H.265, if the FiOS is working, and then fall over to a much lower data rate if it's not. So the fact that most non-fiber connections are limited to about 12 megabits is an issue. That gives you basically only two video feeds you can count on. You can do a third, but you'll lose it if the internet rate drops at all.
Okay. One more came in for Brian. This is great because we got a question from one of the mega churches in town. This is from Michael Henson. He's asking, he's curious about on the NDI, you were showing multi-views. Tell us a little more about what NDI is doing with how you can create a multi-view.
Yeah, so processing engine, as I kind of showed the slide, if we get back to this slide here, it's very simplistic with this gray box down here, but we have an NDI feed going into a module, and it would just be like a Ross Open Gear frame or a Kaleido where we have 8 inputs or 16 inputs of NDI feeds going in, and then the processing engine creates the multi-viewer.
Okay.
And then that multi-viewer comes out as an NDI feed, and then if we're going to send that to a remote contributor viewer, we would recompress it on the output. So the processing engine does that magic internally. It's a feature of the system with this particular product. You can do NDI multi-viewers in addition to processing engine. NewTek has a product called Connect Pro that allows you to do some multi-viewers. If you search NDI multi-viewer out there, there's quite a few options out there.
Okay. And does that include audio meters?
Yes. Yeah, the processing engine does have, it's in the next slide over here, meter bridge.
Okay, cool.
So we can watch all our audio feeds, and you can do mix minus in processing engine as well, and we used a lot of that.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you guys very much. This was great. I think this, man, you both just nailed it. These were great presentations. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Brian, taking your time. Rick, I know you've done it a bunch of times, and I guess Brian has too. So we all miss getting together and having the barbecue, right, Rick? But hopefully one day we will. We'll do it again. All right.
Good. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bob. Thanks, SMPTE.
Thank you so much. All right. See you guys. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.